The reason we need to have these types of dialogues, and I've said this nearly in every study, but I'll be very brief and to the point. There are an alarming number of Christians today who are Trinitarian in their belief. They were raised as Trinitarian Christians. This would include not just normative Christian circles, but within emerging Messianic circles. So we have Messianics who are embracing the Hebraic roots of their faith, but who are also challenged by what I'm about to say. There are a growing number of Christians who are abandoning the Trinitarian position in favor of a Unitarian position, which adheres to a single being known as God, who has an exalted human son named Jesus. He's an exalted human, right? He's God's agency, but he's not fully divine. He possesses qualities that God possesses because God has conferred those same qualities to him, such as the right to receive human worship, or can sit at the right hand of God, or his body has been resurrected and exalted and deified, so to say. So we have a growing number of Trinitarians who are abandoning their Trinitarian upbringing because they feel uncomfortable worshiping a man called Jesus, or worshiping what they think is an idolatrous version. They feel that worship should be directed to God alone, and so in their minds, they feel that if I worship Jesus as God, if Jesus isn't God, but he's simply merely a deified human being, then I'm committing idolatry by worshiping and ascribing a quality to a human that otherwise should not be ascribed. It's kind of like the traditional Jewish view. And so from the Christian perspective, it's probably tempting to abandon your Trinitarian background because the Trinitarian concept, you maybe heard a well-meaning Unitarian such as Dr. Dale Tuggy speak, you watched a YouTube video, and you've always been bothered by the math of Trinity. You know, how can 1 + 1 + 1 = 3? Or 1 + 1 + 1 = 1, or something like that. So you're attracted to Unitarian logic because of the math, and because of what you think are logical inconsistencies in the Bible, and you're attracted to those 10% of verses that don't seem to support a Trinitarian perspective, and so you end up abandoning Trinitarian as a Christian and in favor of Unitarian views based on that. That's one perspective. But what I want to say is that there are the growing number of Messianics who have adopted the Hebraic lifestyle and are embracing Torah as an everyday lifestyle. They typically start abandoning Trinitarian concepts due to the influence of Judaism in Messianic circles. And of course, normative Judaism rejects Trinitarian theology in favor of a monotheistic Unitarian position, such as the mainstream Unitarian position. Mainstream Judaism is Unitarian in their belief of God. They do not, of course, espouse to any notion of a God-man. They might call Jesus a good teacher, maybe a rabbi, a revered rabbi, but they certainly don't worship him as God, and many of them, of course, don't recognize him as even worthy of worship from the great rabbi position. So we have a growing number of Messianics in Messianic congregations who begin to study under traditional rabbis and hear what the ancient rabbis have to say about God's unified position as a one being. Worship should be ascribed only to God, and many of these same Messianics begin to question their own Messianic rabbis and Messianic teachers and Messianic congregations, and they begin to be attracted to the notion that perhaps Jesus should not be worshipped as God. Maybe it is idolatrous, and so they abandon their Trinitarian position in favor of adopting something that's closer to a Unitarian position, where they, again, like Dr. Dale Tuggy, they feel they can have their cake and eat it too by worshiping God alone as God, but worshiping Jesus as the exalted human that God raised up to God's very right hand. So thus, again, I'll say this and I really will stop talking. Unitarian position such as Dr. Dale Tuggy says that we can worship Jesus, but we don't worship him as God. At least not in the broad sense of the word, not in the overall generic sense of the word God. We can worship Jesus as God only in special contexts, and the context is that God has conferred deified attributes upon this human being known as Jesus, and therefore in those special contexts Jesus can receive worship because God commands it to be so. And that's Dr. Dale Tuggy's answer to worship. How can we worship Jesus if he's not God? And in the position of, I think, Oneness Pentecostalism, they worship Jesus as God because Jesus really is God, right? the being known as God, his name is Jesus. So they believe in one God. He's not tripersonal. It's simply that Jesus is God. Of course, that's different than what Dr. Dale Tuggy is believing. So there's multiple versions of Unitarian belief, just like there's multiple narratives of the Trinitarian aspect of belief as well. Okay, having said all of that, let me look at my time here, see what I'm doing. All right, doing pretty good. All right, let's jump now into this part of my study and begin to look at the Trinitarian position. But first, one more look at Dr. Dale Tuggy's version of Unitarian so that you can begin to understand when you hear someone start to say, well, I don't believe Jesus is God, before you can begin to even defend your view or even dismantle their view, it's helpful to know exactly what they're trying to say. Sometimes I have to ask them, what exactly are you trying to say that about God? Well, here's what I'm trying to do in my commentary is give you some of the verbiage of a very well-known, very vocal, very well-respected, and very intelligent Unitarian such as Dr. Dale Tuggy.